Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, I'm talking about album number 4 from 808 State. Gorgeous. I've always been of the opinion that 808 State more or less got better with each successive album, though in some ways I can understand if some people thought they'd taken a fairly significant step down for album number 4 here. Gorgeous is an album that basically continues going in the direction they'd started moving in with XL, going more pop and more polished, but one thing they absolutely did not do was water themselves down. Gorgeous, in addition to being probably a more easily accessible album, was also more expansive and had a greater variety. And of course, the middle schooler me who didn't know any better, this album was only marginally less crazy sounding than everything else they had. There are 15 tracks on this thing and there's so much to unpack. This is the one album of theirs that probably fits together the least effectively in retrospect. It kinda starts in one place and maintains some level of consistency for a while, then in the last third or so it kinda just goes off the rails, shifts mood entirely, and ends in a, shall we say, less than dignified fashion. But I also kind of really like that about that. 808 States have never exactly been the kind of band to take themselves super seriously. You have an album called Gorgeous, with the album artwork being a picture of the planet Earth, and the final track is called Sexy Synthesizer. Why not? That being said, I do believe there are a lot of moments on this thing, mostly on the first half, which do in fact embody that title well. And the production on this thing is consistently very much gorgeous, even if the ideas for the tracks themselves can be pretty dumb sometimes. So going down track by track, the way the album starts is actually quite fitting for the whole gorgeous theme. That would be the track Plan 9. A light and breezy down-tempo number that just happens to have a pretty danceable beat. It's got this very nice guitar lick that just easily calms me down. Do-do-do-do. But pairs it up with some of their usual side tracks. That being said, unlike a lot of XL tracks, it never really flies off the handle or ends up at some point that seems completely unrelated from where you started. Even if it does meander around some other hooks, they aren't really that far a cry from the original hook, and it all fits together really smoothly. Quite possibly the most relaxing track these guys have ever released, though it still very much works as an 808 State track. And then right after that, like with XL, the second track is a pop track with a singer from an 80s new wave outfit. This time the track is Moses, and the singer is Ian McCulloch from Echo and the Bunnymen. I mean, lower profile than Bernard Sumner from New Order, but I actually had heard of Echo and the Bunnymen without making the connection of the lead singer being on this track. Moses is this really straightforward pop track. Some people had problems with it being too commercial, I guess, and I was initially among them. Though I did warm up to it fairly quickly. Because after working on this review, I'm convinced this is the single biggest earworm of their entire career. These guys have already had a natural talent for coming up with great hooks, especially on this album. But this track has been stuck in my head for the past 2 days, nearly completely unbroken. It's gotten a little annoying, as do any tracks that get stuck in my head for longer than a day, but it's still a ton of fun when I actually listen to it. The chorus just really slaps, for lack of a better term. I don't want nobody but you. I don't want nobody but you. Actually, it's the verses which get stuck in my head more frequently, interestingly enough. But I digress. Now, that track pretty smoothly transitions into Contrite, which starts out with all these dramatic synth pads and these church bell sounds, along with some female singer popping in, who I won't imitate because I don't have the confidence that my voice is capable of doing so properly. It does set up a quite spacey vibe that does fit well with the sound of the album so far, although they are sure to include a lot of noisier drum and bass sections as well. Now, this track kinda blends in with these other ones. It's not a huge standout, but it's still pretty good. For what it's worth, this album does have a couple of tracks where I'm not as engaged. There's high points and low points, but I've listened to this album so much at this point that I can't bring myself to say that it would feel right to remove any of them from the album. But then we get to probably my favorite track on the whole album, 10 times 10. This is one of those tracks that I can't write about and listen to at the same time because anytime it comes on, I gotta move along with it. This is seriously one of my all-time favorite 808 State tracks. I remember buying it when I was a little 6th grader because it was the most popular track on the album at the time. And suddenly having so freaking much fun with it, just right from the get-go. The pianos at the beginning going up against the gospel singers telling you to raise the feeling 10 times 10. The drop that follows isn't even in the same key, but is still ridiculously satisfying. Like, despite the fact that this track seems to switch between, like, 3 different songs at different parts, this is the kind of thing that I can, like, plug into my car stereo and then jam out like that Bohemian Rhapsody scene from Wayne's World.
If it's true for you, it's good for me. We're feeling 10 times 10.
Yeah, I thought it was amazingly random and just amazing sounding, both as a kid and to this day. Of course, right after that, we move on to 1 in 10 with UB40. I did like this one as a kid. Catchy little tune there that was easy to sing along to. I am the 1 in 10, a number on the list. I did discover later in life that UB40 kinda generally suck, and are kind of a really weird choice for guest vocalists, but childhood nostalgia won over with me on that one. It's also really short, like it's just one little inconsequential moment on this thing, but I'm guaranteed to sing along with it, or at least lip sync. Just a quick little burst of fun there. And Europa. I think they were trying for something kind of Orbital-esque with this one, though it took me a couple of years to admit that, since I thought, oh, this track sounds terrible, there's no way you can compare this to Orbital. But, first of all, it doesn't sound terrible to me now. It is definitely lacking in the low end, there's not very much bass, but, it does have this cool angelic sound to it that you did get out of some of Orbital's work with, like, Kirsty Hawkshaw and Alison Goldfrapp. I don't know if Caroline Seaman, the vocalist on this one, is on the same level as those two, but I sure as hell can't hit the notes she does. It's a very bright track that maybe doesn't stand out as much to me now, but still works pretty well, and as with most of these tracks, it's an earworm all the same. I think the whole atmosphere of the track fits the title and album cover a bit better than the 2 previous tracks did. Now after that, you got a series of instrumentals. Orbit, Black Morpheus, and Southern Cross, all of which are major personal highlights. Orbit is probably the least interesting of the 3, however it is also probably the catchiest of the 3. A lot of bright and cheerful acid synths in that one. Do 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 do. Black Morpheus is a lot moodier and jazzier, got melodies played on clarinets and saxophones. I think this is the kind of thing you could classify as acid jazz. And then finally, Southern Cross is kind of where the first half of this album ends. A sparkly and spacey number with these really relaxing synth sequences, sometimes accompanied by choirs, and often the track would get accompanied by this big didgeridoo-like bass synth, and would become more danceable in those sections. It's one of the smoothest pieces 808 State have ever done. Even in the most intense sections, it's still pretty spacey and relaxing. Possibly tied with 10 times 10, his favorite track on the album. And I say the first half of the album ends here is by being at track 9 of 15, because Southern Cross ends in this weird little squeaky sound effect, which also happens to be the last sound you hear on this album. I feel like they were kind of thinking about this, because the album thus far has just kind of really carried the sense of coolness and glossiness to it that helped everything fit together somehow. But after this point is where the album kind of starts to take a turn. Starts to slowly derail itself, and the atmosphere it built up to this point is not quite as unified. Though not all of it. I mean, Nimbus is no less cool than everything that preceded it, though it does have a much darker atmosphere, really only previously echoed in any way by Contrike. And it's also done much better here, if you ask me. A lot of these super dramatic arpeggio synth pads really seeming to create this menacing vibe that fits the Rain Cloud related title, but without sacrificing the excellent melodies. Even if the track itself does take more than a few weird sidetracks, again, they don't really feel out of place either. And then the final third, it feels like they kinda start to just slowly give up on making sense. Colony is suitably dark sounding to lead out of Nimbus, with these intense bass lines that are rather catchy. I've seen though that some versions of this album actually start with Colony, which is a really weird choice, if you ask me. Though I suppose it's not the worst intro you could have picked. Plan 9 is a much better opener in my opinion though. After that we get Time Bomb, which at this point, we're not really trying to fit into any gorgeous theme at all anymore. The track has honestly always felt pretty out of place to me, but it is a grower. It is a suitably explosive track in which the hard-hitting beat is the biggest focus instead of any real melodic grooves, even though it's not like they're not there anymore. Then Stormin Norman seems to fit a little better with the rest of the album, being much more melody-focused, but still kind of feels more like some random track you'd find in the middle of XL. Hook's catchy enough to work well throughout, but still kind of jumping all over the place and being unpredictable. There's a section with these cool xylophones that lasts like 15 seconds at most. There's this section where it suddenly breaks out into a chorus of synth violins out of nowhere. Like, the sounds themselves don't feel out of place, given how the album started, but structurally it's pretty all over the place. Still, like most of XL, it is very much a fun track. But by the last two tracks, they've clearly just given up. Sexy Dancer and Sexy Synthesizer are the last two tracks. The former would probably be my pick for least favorite on the album. It's catchy, sure, but that one clip that goes, wow, kinda puts me off, and the bass line, while definitely different sounding, just isn't all that satisfying. There's not a lot to this track either, but again, I wouldn't say it's skippable. Sexy Synthesizer, on the other hand, is a much better way to go out. I mean, may not sound like it from the title, as I mentioned before, but it's the kind of track that just owns its cheesiness and goes all out with it. It's a lot more hard-hitting, fast-paced, the bass lines are a lot more satisfying, it's got these cool female vocals and other various acid synths and parts that make it more fun to listen to, and at the end, it just completely falls apart. Literally just throws all the sounds you heard in the track previously in a random heap and then ends with that squeaky sound again. It's the kind of thing that makes me think, this is a dumb way to end, and they know exactly how dumb an ending this is. I kinda love it for that. 808 State just are absolutely the kind of band who would end their album on easily the silliest track on the whole lineup, because why not? So that's all the tracks. Time to talk about the album overall. Now, I will admit, trying to write this review and explain why I thought this was better than XL kind of became difficult, as I started to realize how this album just soaks itself in 90s technopop cliches. It's the kind of album that if people think it's lame and dated and dislike it for that, I will absolutely get it. I mean, I watched the music video for 10 x 10 while preparing for this video, and when I saw it, it gave me a lot of mixed feelings. On one hand, I was like, this is awesome, but on the other hand, this is kind of heartbreaking. Because the video is basically all just cheesy 90s computer graphics, and it really looked dated and lame. And worse still, it just seemed to fit perfectly for that track, and some of the feelings that I was getting out of Gorgeous. But despite the fact that this album does soak itself in all the 90s cheese, I still always come out of this album loving every moment of it. Yes, including the lesser moments like Contrike and Sexy Dancer. Somehow, despite having repeatedly listened to the album over the course of several days, like I always do for these videos, I don't yet feel like I'm sick of it. And that's major praise that I can't really give as strongly to 90 or XL. This is the album that made me love all those old 90s techno cliches and just smile anytime they come up. This is the album that made, like, Fade my favorite track from Kanye's The Life of Pablo. And in spite of everything, this is still an album that really seems to take me somewhere else with its atmosphere, even with the weirdness for the majority of the album. I do feel like it's making me, you know, like float above the earth and looking down on it from space like the album cover wants me to. even though that doesn't apply as well to the final third. Gorgeous did admittedly come off to me more brainless than I remember it being, but somehow it comes out looking surprisingly dignified in spite of how brainless it is. It's an album I have a hard time expressing why I love it as much as I do. If you think this was the worst 808 State album, I will understand, but I love every track on it. I hope people do check it out regardless, cause I feel like this is the album that instead of being dated and lame, it shows why a lot of these ideas became cliches of the era in the first place, because they're all super well executed and easy to get into. Even the worst moments are still really fun. Regardless of everything though, I've indulged in this album's spaciness / cheesiness many times in the past, and I'm going to continue to do so many times in the future. I love this album. I'm overall feeling a solid 9 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.